Now we will discuss Incoterms in a way that anyone can understand. Incoterms are essentially the rule that governs international trade. They specify who is responsible for what, where the risks are, and who pays for which aspect of a transaction. Let's get into what Incoterms do. Obligations are an important part. Assume a company like Apple is shipping iPhones abroad. Incoterms specify whether Apple or the buyer is responsible for organizing and paying for items such as shipping, insurance, and paperwork. Risk is another significant factor. Incoterms specify when the risk for iPhone passes from Apple to the buyer. This is critical in case something goes wrong during transportation. Incoterms also include cost breakdowns. They specify who pays for what, which could include transportation, loading and unloading fees, and other associated expenses. Now it is equally important to understand what Incoterms do not do, because there can be misconceptions related to Incoterms which can lead to legal proceedings and problems. So it is equally important to understand what it does not do. So they do not create a sales contract by themselves. They do not describe the quality or specification of the product. In our case, they won't describe iPhone's specification or quality, nor do they specify the payment terms. They do not handle legal issues beyond the scope of shipping. This means that Incoterms do not cover matters such as government bans, environmental regulation, or ownership of goods in transit. Also, they do not resolve disputes. If Apple and the buyer have a disagreement, Incoterm will not decide who is correct. Consider Tesla shipping cars to Europe. If they use FOB Incoterm, that is free on board Incoterm, they are responsible for transporting the car to the port and loading them on the ship, because the Incoterm is named as free on board. Following that, the buyer in Europe assumes the risk and cost after the goods are loaded, after the car is loaded onto the ship. However, Incoterm will not govern how Tesla is paid or what happens if there is a problem with the car's specification. So to summarize, Incoterms make aspects of international trade simpler by establishing fundamental rules. However, they are only part of larger contract and trade process. It is critical for businesses to have comprehensive agreements in place, particularly for large international transactions. So, understanding Incoterms is an excellent starting point, but it is only one component of developing a comprehensive international trade agreement. Now, we will talk about Incoterms 2020, which may sound dry at first, but believe me, it's a game changer for anyone involved in international trade. Incoterms are essential, a set of rules that specify who is responsible for what in the vast world of cross-border purchasing and sales. First and foremost, when dealing with Incoterms, you must be clear about which version you are using. For example, Incoterms 2020 is the version which you are using, then mention it to ensure that everyone is in agreement. It's a simple step, but it's critical to avoid any misunderstanding or confusions down the road. As before Incoterm 2020, there was Incoterm 2010. So you need to be always specific which Incoterms series you are using. One of the most important aspects of Incoterm is the ability to specify location to a high degree of precision. This is all about determining exactly where goods will be picked or dropped off. It is critical because it establishes who is accountable for what, particularly in terms of risk and cost. Assume your contract states EXW, XWorks, Global Tech Warehouse, Houston, Incoterms 2020. This means that the buyer must pick up the goods from Global Tech Warehouse in Houston and handle everything else from there, including transportation and risk. As XWorks is the Incoterm which is simple for the seller, as the only responsibility for the seller is to make sure that he makes the good available for pickup. That's why XWorks is the least responsibility and cost to seller when it comes to logistics, but it is the most to the buyer. So it is very important for the buyer to be careful about the pickup point. So it should be mentioned correctly into the contract that which will be the pickup point and where should the buyer send his transporter to pick up the cargo. Incoterms are divided into 4 major groups, each with distinct vibe in terms of what the seller and buyer are expected to do. So the first group is E group, which includes XWorks, which means that the buyer is responsible for everything after the seller makes sure the goods are ready to be picked up, which we have already discussed right now. Then there is the F group, which includes the terms like FCA, FAS and FOB. This is where the seller does a little more legwork to get the goods to a specific point. However, the buyer is ultimately responsible after that point. Then there are C groups terms such as CFR and CIF, which require the seller to cover transportation to a specific location, but the buyer bears the risk much earlier than expected. Then there's D group Incoterms, which has terms like DDP, DPU and DAP, in which the seller does the heavy lifting, handling almost everything until the goods arrive at the buyer's doorstep. See, choosing the appropriate Incoterm is critical. It's not just about the goods or how they get from point A to point B. It's about balancing responsibilities and risk in a way that benefits both the parties. Understanding these terms can make the process go much smoother, ensuring that everyone understands what they are signing up for and avoiding unpleasant surprises. So here is a chart which will be our final discussion. Starting with ex-works, the export packaging will be done by the seller, while the buyer will perform all the rest of the task, which makes the invoice value the least for the buyer. The seller has to do the least footwork. Coming to FCA, in FCA there are some more additional tasks such as delivering the goods at the name placed on the export side of the shipment and getting the export custom clearance done by the seller. As there are additional tasks which are being performed by the seller, the invoice value will increase. The seller won't do this for charity, right? He is also paying someone to do this task, and if he has the facilities to perform this task, he will make sure that he earns from it. So as we keep on moving ahead, the invoice value will keep on increasing as the task performed by the seller will be more and more, from ex-works to DDP. Now coming to FAS, which is free alongside ship, in which the seller was doing the same task as FCA, but he was performing an additional task of making sure the goods are placed alongside the ship. So he was paying terminal handling at the origin, which comes with a cost. This terminal handling has to be paid to the shipping line, and the shipping line will pay the terminal handling to the port authorities. Now in this example, the invoice value is $1,400. The number of invoice value are just for your basic understanding. This can be from $1,000 to $1 million or $1 billion as well. Now coming to FOB. This is the Incoterm which is most widely used and favorite of traders. So the responsibility of the seller here is until the goods are loaded onto the ship. After that, it is the buyer who takes over. Now moving on to the C type of Incoterms. Now this Incoterms are in which the seller is made to pay for the ocean freight. Whereas till now in our 4 previous Incoterms, the seller wasn't paying for main carriage. That is the ocean freight or air freight. But when it comes to C type of Incoterm, the seller will pay for the main carriage. So in CFR, the seller will pay for ocean freight, as CFR is only ocean specific Incoterm. Similarly, in CIF, he will pay for ocean freight, but I comes into action, which is insurance. So the insurance will also be arranged by the seller, which increases the invoice value further. Now coming to CPT, which is carriage paid to, where the insurance part is negotiable. This is the negotiable part where if the buyer does not have any contact, the buyer requests the seller, please arrange for cargo insurance. And if the seller agrees to do so, they can negotiate and the seller can arrange for the cargo insurance. But usually in CPT, the cargo insurance is arranged by the buyer. The seller's task in CPT will be till the cargo arriving at the terminal. Now coming to CIP, which is carriage insurance paid to. The difference between CPT and CIP is insurance. Now coming to D types of Incoterm, which are delivery Incoterms, where the seller will perform tasks after completion of the main carriage. These are the most costliest Incoterm, where the seller performs the most and the buyer performs the least. But the buyer pays the most and the seller earns the most. In DAP, the seller will deliver at a named place, similarly as we discussed. In DPU, which is delivered at place unloaded, the seller will unload the goods at the named place. Whereas in DDP, the unloading has to be done by the buyer. The difference between DPU and DDP is that in DPU, the unloading will be done by the seller, but the import duty won't be paid by the seller. It will be paid by the buyer. Whereas in DDP, the unloading at the named place will be done by the buyer, but the seller has to clear customs at the importing country. This makes DDP the most costliest Incoterm, where the tasks performed by the seller are the most and the seller will earn profit on logistics activity which he has performed. So from this we can say that if you are an importer, the Xworks Incoterm will be a profitable Incoterm for you if you have good contacts in the exporting country. But if you don't have any contacts, you can go for DDP and learn the logistics part. Once you become expert and confident about logistics, you can lower the responsibility on the seller and avoid paying additional charges or commissions which are hidden inside the invoice.